Kia ora koutou katoa, and thank you, President Biden and Special Envoy Kerry, for inviting New Zealand to participate in this Leaders Summit on climate and for your commitment to US leadership on climate change. Our Pacific neighbours have identified climate change as the single biggest threat to their livelihoods, security, and well-being. Our collective goal here at this summit and beyond has to be effective global action on climate change. That means our collective commitments in 2021 will need to be enough to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial temperatures. New Zealand has set the 1.5 degree limit at the heart of our domestic climate change legislation, our Zero Carbon Act. We've also committed to a 2050 zero carbon target, and work is underway to revise our nationally determined contribution to ensure we are doing our part. We will lift our ambition because we must. Our collective transition to low carbon economies means that all aspects of our economic activity is going to need to be working towards limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. Finance, both our financial systems and financial flows to assist developing countries, is at the heart of that transition. And that's why we call on others to follow what here in New Zealand we have done by doing the following four things. 1, price carbon. 2, make climate-related financial disclosures mandatory. 3, end fossil fuel subsidies. And 4, finance adaptation. New Zealand has been pricing carbon since our emissions trading scheme was introduced in 2008. And in a world first, we'll begin pricing agricultural emissions from 2025. If you price carbon, emitters follow by innovating. On finance, in 2020, New Zealand was the first country to announce mandatory climate-related financial disclosures. What gets reported gets managed. It's one thing for investors to have a climate lens in their investment, but when it's economy-wide, that changes the way in which all financial flows and risks are managed. On fossil fuels, global agreement on the need for fossil fuel subsidy reform is long overdue. Fossil fuel subsidies undo any advances we make on pricing carbon. We cannot take money from emitters paying for their carbon emissions and then give them money back in subsidies. Join us in supporting a renewed WTO ministerial statement on fossil fuel subsidy reform at the 12th Ministerial Conference in November. Finally, developing countries, particularly those most vulnerable to the effects of climate change, such as Pacific SIDS, have a genuine need for easily accessible finance to support their climate change action, both for adaptation and mitigation. This is even more important as economies recover from COVID-19. While support for adaptation has been increasing, finance for adaptation remains low. We must do better to support countries to adapt to the impacts of climate change. The numbers we are discussing are beyond astronomical. Globally, fossil fuel subsidies total around $500 billion a year. This is 5 times our annual climate finance goal of $100 billion a year. Imagine what diverting trillions of mobilized finance could do to help us achieve our collective goal to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. It is time to stop imagining and for us to do what is needed. He waka ika noa, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.